Let's get started. So the title of this session is Strengthening Foundations. You heard a lot in the earlier morning plenaries about the foundational things that need to happen in order to make sure that in the next 10 years of sustainability action that we really make a difference and avoid some of the pitfalls that were mentioned in the earlier panels. So this panel is going to be focusing on that. We're going to be tag teaming on the moderation for this session between my colleague Joshua and me, Kristen. And so Joshua can introduce himself as well as the panelists, and I will come join him. As I mentioned earlier to those who are here early, we're going to be using Swap Card today. We're going to take questions on the Swap Card app, both from people online and in the room, and we will stop at a certain point and pick out questions that have been voted up. So please use the app to write in your questions, look at what other people are writing, and vote up the questions that you would really like to see answered during this session. Okay, so with that, Joshua, turning back over to you.
Thank you, Kristen. Good morning, everyone. I'm Joshua Wickerham, the Outreach and Engagement Manager at ISEAL. It's a pleasure to co-moderate this panel with Kristen on strengthening foundations. In the morning, we've heard about the strong role that regulation and voluntary sustainability systems can play in helping companies implement due diligence requirements, reporting requirements, and other elements. And we're moving into a much more interactive component of the day. In addition to the questions we have for the amazing panelists, we'll be taking the swap card questions. And part of the reason for this panel is to get us thinking about what are the outstanding challenges that companies are facing, that producers and other value chain actors are facing, and how do we strengthen sustainability systems to support those companies and their actors. And then after lunch, we can discuss those issues. We can discuss those issues over lunch, and then after lunch, we'll be going into breakout sessions where we'll have a chance to deep dive into these issues. So this is laying the foundations of our knowledge and some of the challenges and some of the solutions to get us inspired. Happy to introduce our panelists, Andre de Freitas, the Executive Director of Solidaridad, Peter Fehlberg, the Executive Director of Preferred by Nature, Martina Bozola, who is Senior Advisor on Sustainability and Livelihood at the International Trade Center, and Lina Ramon, who is the Chief Information and Technology Officer at the Forest Stewardship Council. And if we can keep our answers to 2 or 3 minutes, so we'll have more time for audience questions. My first questions are around current status, understanding some of the critical challenges that exist for companies. What are the obstacles for companies in implementing new sustainability regulations? So Andre first, as Executive Director of Solidaridad, what do you see as some of the most significant challenges that companies are facing when implementing new sustainability policies, and how can these be effectively addressed?
Thank you, Joshua. Talking specifically about the UDR, right? We have what we see is, and Solidaridad works especially with small-scale farmers in developing countries and international commodities, so a lot of them fall into the UDR. So what we're seeing is there's an information gap, so many producers do not know about the UDR, do not have enough information about that, and are definitely not prepared. And even if you look into companies how well companies understand the origin of their products, there's still significant gaps in that. I was just reading a piece of information this morning. One of company that's been in this space, very committed for many years. In one critical supply chain, they're still not there. They still have 90% traceability in terms of going back, and they don't know the other 10% yet. So there's big challenges in that, and we have 6 months for implementation. So I think what the challenge that we'll see, and now talking from the point of view of small-scale farmers, is that these farmers are likely going to be excluded from the European market. We're already seeing signs of this. So the companies in the palm oil sector that we talked to, they're saying, well, look, we're gonna supply Europe from the nucleus states, which are if you think about palm oil, you have the mill, you have the nucleus states around the palm oil, they're bigger areas, plantations, and then you have the small growers. They're gonna shift supply to Europe to the nucleus states. And in our estimates, roughly 100,000 small growers of palm oil will lose access to the European market. They will still sell their palm oil. They'll sell it to India, to China, places that may not value sustainability, which could even potentially increase deforestation in some cases. So I think there's a huge challenge there. I think when the UDR is particularly challenging as a piece of legislation because it's very designed as pass-fail and with penalties associated and potentially even criminal charges in the future depending on how national laws go. So what this will do in practice is that the legal departments of companies are going to take care of procurement. This becomes a legal compliance issue. There's a legal risk. If you talk about more vulnerable groups like small-scale producers, they are harder to work with, there's bigger transaction costs, and they are riskier. And I have met very few lawyers in my life that will say, let's do the harder thing, which is also the riskier thing. So what we'll see is that exclusion of small-scale producers from these supply chains to Europe. So I think there's a big challenge that we have that. The exception will be in crops where you don't have anywhere to go, like cocoa and I think rubber to some extent there. So I think those you will have to figure things out. And this will require investments. And I've been getting a sign to stop, so I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Andre. Martina, from ITC's perspective, you have a mandate as a UN agency to work with SMEs and work on their trade competitiveness. And what are some of the complexities and challenges from an SME or an MSME perspective in navigating these new regulations?
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to build on what has been said before, also in the panel before, looking really at the focus on the MSMEs producer organization. So at the International Trade Center, we have been conducting for the past 2 years pilots on how mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence will work in practice with a focus on the CSDDD, even if it has been just adopted in May. This May. And some of the challenges and complexity we saw, to start with awareness, sound information. You cannot be asked to prepare about something that you don't know is coming, or that you know is coming, but you have very confusing or unclear information or complex information. I give some example from actual story in our work in the pilot. Confusion, like actors account, why do you want us to do another certification? Between the voluntary, the mandatory certification. Confusion between the EUDR that is perceived more urgent is also starting. I had people coming and saying after workshop where we explained, I was thinking, you are weird, you call the UDR with another name. Now I understand there's another legislation coming. So a lot of misunderstanding or on the confusion on child labor, child work. Are you coming with new definition? No, this is about definition already included in international signed treaty. So the power of awareness and how you can raise this awareness. So that's a challenge, and context specific and different language, different audience. The elephant in the room was touched upon in the last question, in the last panel. The challenge of who is gonna pay for this, even the preparation as a cost. And this may also hinder trust, if every actor in the value chain fear that costs are passed, and so that's another big challenge. And this is really, especially for the CSDDD, it's a value chain approach. We cannot work in silo, only train the MSMEs, even if they are not in their scope, only work with the trader, no, it is, we heard before on the OECD six-step due diligence, it's a process, it's not a pass or fail, and no one can do this alone. So I'll focus on these 3 challenges to start. Thanks.
Thank you, Martina. Next, Lena, you come from a private sector data background. You're relatively new to the sustainability space, but FSC has been making a lot of investments in better data, supporting due diligence. What are some of the new technologies that you're leveraging, and what have you seen as some of the best and most effective interventions you're making or innovations you're making?
Thank you, Joshua, and thank you for the invitation. So at FSC, I can name two main innovations that we are working. First one is blockchain, FSC blockchain. I will take a minute to explain what is the blockchain technology. It is a layer that provides secure and immutable transactions data. So it's connecting sellers with buyers, producers, exporters, importers. Yeah? So what does it mean for FSC? It will create for us a verifiable and transparent chain of custody for our forest products. Saying in other words, every step in the supply chain will have the possibility to validate that every product that is coming as a claim-certified product can be traced back to a sustainable managed forest, which is a huge opportunity for us. This will bring not only transparency and trust among our stakeholders, but also it will bring the potential to mitigate risk for illegal logging coming into our systems. The second one, and it's natural to be a complementary approach, is our GIS hub. We will be collecting data for forest certified areas. We will be managing risk assessment, risk mitigations that are tagged to the origin of our forest. Yeah? And this will enable us to collect and build data sets that will be of potentially huge use with aspects like biodiversity or conservation areas, or actually the areas that we are actively manage. So I think in general, this will, combining these two technologies will uphold our strengths and validate the sustainability and traceability aspects of it.
Thanks, Lena. One of the issues that we haven't really discussed much today so far is the sea change in green claims requirements, the pressure on companies to improve the credibility, reliability, verification of their claims, the new Green Claims Directive. And from Preferred by Nature's perspective, what are you doing to support companies to make sure that their green claims are credible and reliable?
Thanks for the question. I mean, we are doing a number of different things within Preferred by Nature. One of them, we are a certification body certifying according to quite a lot of different schemes. I think we are getting close to 30 now. Then we are helping companies in major international companies in evaluating the risk in their supply chain, evaluating how they are sourcing, helping them mitigating the risk and ensure that that they are excluding controversial claims from their supply chain. When we are looking into the certification part of it, I mean, one of the core things that we are doing is actually engaging with ISEAL, and fortunately, ISEAL have set some good, one good code now in place that are covering all the basic of certification system, make sure that there's a robust system to set standards, make sure that there is that impact can be measured, and there is an assurance system that can actually enforce that the requirements are being followed on the ground. So I think this is really a very good foundation for moving forward. when that's said, I also think there's some areas where there is some room for improvement within what ISEAL and ISEAL members are doing. One thing that, in order to ensure that the consumers or the end users actually can trust the claim that are coming through the certification system, is that there's a robust chain of custody system in place, that you know that end product is actually coming from a certified source and has not been mixed with controversial material through the supply chain. And there, ISEAL have done something. I think more can be done within this area, and more should be done. There's a couple of other areas that we are really working on. I think this point with the smallholders that have been brought up many times today is really, really important. I mean, we really need to take care that we are not excluding the small and the poor from the sustainability market. And here we in Preferred by Nature strongly believe in due diligence, risk-based approaches as one way of focusing on where are the issues, focusing the assurance there. And the other hand is focusing on outcome requirements, focusing on what's actually going on in the field. When you're talking about smallholders, you shouldn't come up and require a lot of documentations, etc. If it's good what you see in the field, paperwork is less important. If you just focus on papers, it can look really bad in the field, and at the end of the day, what's happened in the field on the ground is what's really matter.
Yeah, in your work on standards for the data in the value chain and the risk alliance to address these common risks are really important areas of work as well. Traceability, chain of custody has come up a lot in all of the sessions. It's not the same as sustainability, but it's a big component of a lot of EUDR requirements, other requirements. Andre, what are some of the key technological advances that have been implemented to improve traceability and transparency within the global supply chain from Solidaridad's perspective? Could you share any successful case studies or examples that have been successful?
So I think we're in an interesting moment in the traceability space. The technical challenges have been solved. So I think there are many different solutions that provide traceability. Some of them, well, let me go backtrack. So there's many different solutions out there that can be used. We work with a few of them in the supply chains we are engaged, and we actually developed one of our own in the tea sector in India. And that's one that you go from farm gate to consumer, and every step of the chain has a customized app that is used, and then at the end of the day, the consumer can scan the QR code and get information from where it's coming, and also some information on how it was produced. So I think the technological challenges have been solved. So I think that's the good news. There's a lot of options there. I think the challenge that we'll see in things like the EUDR is that by and large, these solutions, they have been developed to provide information and transparency. And they're not necessarily designed to provide an assurance of integrity, so that they're not necessarily designed to prevent fraud. So if someone wants to cheat the system, some solutions do volume reconciliation, which is key. But you're not going to have one single solution being implemented. You have many different solutions out there. So you're not going to have volume reconciliation. And what you'll see, I believe, what you'll see in practice is that you will have a black market of polygons and certificates and volume multiplications that happens already. If you look at timber in the Amazon, you have legalized timber that has all the proper paperwork, but is coming from illegal areas. So that is something that will happen, and it's a challenge because without volume reconciliation, and I think many certification systems have that challenge as well, in terms of credibility, it'll be hard to assure that you're really getting products from these areas. So you could be in the situation which is not great, where people who are serious about implementing such a legislation have a higher cost, higher transaction costs, and people who are not that concerned and just want to access the market however way they can, they will just buy a certificate and trade those volumes multiple times and be it. So quite challenging in that sense.
Yeah, it's encouraging to hear that the technology is here, but these challenges are there, waiting to be addressed as well.
Can I just ask a question? Because I'm looking at the questions coming in from the audience, and just on this point, one of the questions is, will the new due diligence legislation mean more audits or smarter audits? So in relation to what you just said, what do you think? I'm curious in a few other views as well.
I would love to say that it meant more smarter audits. I don't think that's going to happen. I'd love to hear from Peter.
No, in itself, I'm also nervous that it's not becoming smarter audits. And actually, you know, since it's all a risk-based approach and all the obligations are on the importers into the EU, there is not any specific audit requirement. So, but of course, in order to mitigate the risk in the supply chain, traceability risk is a very important one, and there need to be some kind of system in place so that the importers can document to the competent authorities that the origin is the risk of mixing in the supply chain is actually mitigated, and these polygons that they have to submit into the EU system is actually the polygons of where the project is coming from. When that said, there's one point where I think see the technology is developing very fast at the moment, and that is this testing of isotopes and minor components and so on, where there can be new methods at least to validate is approximate region where that has been declared. Is it correct, or does this product come from somewhere completely elsewhere in the world than what's shown on the polygons that are going into the EU system?
Great, thanks, Peter. Is there anything else you'd like to add on from Preferred by Nature's perspective on traceability?
Sure, a lot of things. No, I mean, to be frank, I mean that's one of the area where we have very major concerns, because we see quite a lot of example on fraud also within certified products, and as I mentioned before, I think it's actually critical to get this addressed, so it's not so we can still trust the assurance systems that are in place, and I see, I mean, there's some fundamentals I think really need to be in place, like that there need to be a volume reconciliation system. You need to have control over your volume flow through the system, and you also need to change the mindset from the auditors to be like checklist auditors. Is this in place? Is this in place? And this in place, to a much more investigative approach where they are evaluating the risk of frauds happening and in the supply chain. And I would like to add that this is not failure of the schemes. This is due to a success of the schemes, because the schemes some of them has become major brands, and when there's major brands, there's also value, and that also really increase the incentive for committing fraud. We just need to be smart and keep an eye on where these dodgy things happening, and be able to react fast and efficient where we can see that the system is not working as they are intended to work.
Thank you. Yeah. Changing gears slightly, one of the themes that's come up a lot today is the risk of exclusion of smallholders, and especially when new technology is added, that increases potentially the risk that the most vulnerable would be excluded from a value chain. From FSC's perspective, Lena, what are some of the innovations you've been putting in place to allow more smallholders to access the value chain?
Yeah. So I think smallholders are part of the core of how we set up our standards. I mean, this is not something new. You can name our group certification, where we allowed or enable, not allowed, but enable certificate holders to join forces, to share responsibilities, to achieve the certification as a group and not as an individual. This will, for sure, trigger them to have more access to markets. So I think that's the baseline, and that's where we need to support the entire system. In terms of technology, I think more than the product itself that we are putting in the market, you can name access to blockchain or access to GIS solution, is how we make the process thinking about the different stakeholders, different groups that are going to be involved. So it's how we do the ideation, implementation, design process, building the technology, thinking about them. I'm going to refer to one specific case, blockchain, that we are building, the solution that will allow the certificate holders to do different data capture methods, right? So we can allow them to do direct entries into the system, bulk uploads, or connect directly into different systems that are transacting on it. You can also name small things that will make a huge difference. Are you accessing from a laptop? Are you accessing from a tablet? Yeah? So accessibility in terms of technology is also very important. And I'm going to be more into the creative space that we are doing on exploratory innovation, and it's thinking about how AI, generative AI, can enable more accessible systems. So we are in the testing and prototyping phase of using generative AI to make our standards more accessible. Yeah? So this will be using automated translations or enabling more simplified process towards the certification process. I think the core message here is that we will need to be customer-centric when we build technology, put ourselves in the shoes of who is going to be using this and how this will create then the impact in the sustainable system.
It's exciting. Thanks, Lina. And Martina, from ITC's perspective, how are you supporting more collaboration across value chains, sourcing practices that benefit smallholders?
Thank you. So building again on the work on the pilot I mentioned before, for example, in cocoa and in coffee. First of all, to come across and to be being UN a neutral convener. As I say, no one can do this alone. So convening, facilitating the dialogue on how do we make this work in practice along the value chain segment, and also bringing together public and private sector. So one thing, for example, we have done towards the journey, I say, raising awareness, informing, convening the stakeholder, support stakeholder in the coffee sector, for example, in Ethiopia and Uganda, doing value chain-based action plan. Really say what exists already in our value chain, what are the priority, and who does what, so that we will prepare for this new, in that case, with a focus specifically on the due diligence directive or the reporting directive, and really this sense of co-investment, working together. What exists already? We heard in the panel before, great work on dynamic agroforestry, for example. You know, by doing this, we don't start from zero. So what has been already done? What are the partnerships we'll bring upon? So this neutral convener is one way, supporting actors. Of course, then who define the priorities? You know, because especially when you talk about risk, okay, we have risk in the sector, and bringing the voice of the MSMEs also at the table to say, what do we tackle? The CS3, in particular, the CS3D is not a pass or fail, it's a process. So what do we tackle first? Who set the priority? Have this dialogue. And then the role of tools, you know, I fully agree. ITC, as many in the room know, have been collaborating, for example, as manages the standard map. My colleague Greg is here in the audience and willing to discuss standard map with the audience, you know, with over 300 standard, but also going now into the mandatory new legislation and mapping this. So really working, what we say, the Alliance for Action approach, bringing everyone together and make this work in practice. And we have solid case studies of this happening, and sometimes taking maybe the priority of the MSMEs, but also the dialogue along the value chain. That's really important to operationalize this. Thanks.
Thanks, Martina. Kristen, do we have some interesting questions for our panelists from the audience? And I encourage you, if you haven't already, go into SwapCard and vote up the questions that are interesting, or ask some questions yourself.
Great. Yes, I think they're interesting questions. So let's start with there's one here about defining risk. So what role should sustainability systems play in defining risk for companies as they're looking towards their compliance with due diligence regulations? So I know you want to speak to that, Peter, but I'm going to first ask from a couple different perspectives. First, Lena, maybe with the data that you're collecting, do you think it's a role for FSC to be defining risk in a way that companies can pick up and use? And what would you say from your perspective of supporting smaller companies? So let's hear those two views, and then we can turn to you in the middle.
Well, define is a big role. I think what we will need to refer to is creating a framework to assess the risk. Yeah, the definition of it is something that it will come naturally with the implementation and with the data that we are collecting. But here the importance is providing the framework that will be able to assess, mitigate, and control that risk.
So bringing back to, of course, we need to define and to prioritize risk. And here I'm more in mind, as I said, the CS-DDD rather than the EUDR. And then once these are defined, which brings back the question on tools, which tools. On one side you hear in the ground, there are not enough tools. On the other side, oh, every day we got offered 3 different tools to define and map our risk, balance this. And then even assuming we pass this phase, the risks are defined. It's a process. So where do we start? And where do we start together so that the value chain approach is included? So for me, it's the tools, how we define, and then how we prioritize with a value chain approach, with a system approach. We heard a lot before the word system in the previous panel, and I cannot agree more. We need that. And on the proliferation of tools, we heard a lot the words pre-competitive approach. And that's, again, something I think we need to foster, we need to support more and achieve now that we are going to this mandatory framework. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not sure if define the risk is kind of the right term. I think, measure and evaluate the risk as what assurance scheme can. And for the regulatory framework, it's kind of defined by them what to look into, and then some certification schemes have risk-based approaches built in where it's also the schemes, the standard requirement is kind of defining what to measure. I think there's a huge need for having credible risk data, both among schemes, but also among companies implementing due diligence requirements, and also other stakeholders like competence authorities that have to go out and evaluate if companies have mitigated the right risk and so on. So, and if I can come with a little commercial here, so we have together with ISEAL and ISEAL Innovation Fund and SECO, taking initiative with a number of schemes, FSC, ISB, SBP, and Global Sustainable Platform on Natural Rubber, taking the initiative to establish what we call a Risk Information Alliance, because we see that there's really a need for credible risk information that and we have agreed together to both develop a joint methodology for how to measure the risk, to have joint indicators for what type of risk it is we want to measure, and the goal is to create a joint data base or data storage where we have risk data for core countries, core commodities, core like ownership types, so the different members of the organization can go in and take the data that's relevant for them, but also hopefully data that will be used on a much broader audience, including the private sector, including the authorities, to make sure that we have a much more efficient way of implementing the due diligence requirements.
Okay, one more question, and then maybe some just parting remarks from all of you. But the next question is actually about the fact that the requirement to disclose risk by public companies could have big implications, and particularly in the context of biodiversity and biodiversity harm. What do you think might happen as a result of these new requirements? How could that change the picture? Andre, can I turn to you for that?
There was a question in the earlier panel about sustainability being substituted by some of these legislation and requirements and risk. And I think that is, pun not intended, that is a significant risk that we'll shift from sustainability. Did I say certification? No, I meant sustainability shifting to risk. So I think there's a significant risk that we will shift from sustainability, more comprehensive approaches, to risk approaches, and shift sourcing to safer areas, or areas that are considered safer for the European market. And I think we have to also remember that Europe is becoming less relevant in the world. If you look long term, I mean, the economic power that Europe has is just going to diminish in that. And so more and more we'll see other parts of the world setting their own standards, putting local standards, saying how they want to do things, and those frameworks being very important as well.
So to close up here, we've talked about, as important foundations, technology, innovation, collaboration, partnership, alignment. These kinds of themes have come out from what you've said. So could I just ask each of you to take a couple minutes as we close, just a couple, so 2 minutes, to say something about what do you think is really crucial looking forward to how do we scale partnerships, how do we build partnerships that we need, how do we take technologies forward, what do we need to look to for the future? So closing thoughts. We can start here. Lina?
Well, I can think of 4 main pillars. One is traceability. That's something that we all need to share. The second one is interoperability, so we don't build systems that are isolated, that don't talk to each other. The third one is inevitable coming AI. We need to adopt, we need to address, we need to put the proper governance around it. And the last one, we will become major data processors. So it's our responsibility to have proper security measures with the data that we are doing.
Can I do a little thing different? Who thinks here, raise your hand, who thinks that these legislations like the UDR and CSDDD are fantastic developments, very important in the world? Raise your hand. Okay, not as many people as I thought. Okay. So I believe is a fantastic piece of legislation that is a signal to the world about these important issues that need to be addressed. So I think it's very important that Europe is sending these signals. I think the challenge that we have is that we run the risk of winning the battle and losing the war. So without very clear intentionality from both the European Union in supporting that farm, or in my case, farmers are prepared and that are able to then access the European market, without companies being very intentional and saying, well, I want to work with these not perfect producers, or producers that are not in perfectly safe areas that are the grayer areas. Without that intentionality, I think we may run the situation of winning the battle and losing the war. And then I think if I'm talking about small-scale farmers here, what I would encourage us as a movement of voluntary sustainability systems is to think also of how well we're addressing the needs of small-scale producers. And if you do a simple calculation of saying how much of the production on any given sector is covered by small producers, and how much of, in that case, let's say certified production is covered by small producers, I cannot think of any single sector where we're not failing small producers. So I think there's a challenge to us in critically thinking and challenging ourselves to be able to design systems that are then appropriate and adapted to these stakeholders. Thank you.
Yeah, and I really think that it's an area where there could be a huge room for partnership and working together within the ISEAL community in order to try to align the requirement. I was out recently visiting a rubber grower having 2 hectares, but really innovative. I mean, the perfect scene from a sustainability point of view, with loads of different crops and so on. And we were then talking, okay, what kind of certification schemes should the poor farmer be covered by? And there was at least 5 in order to get his crops certified. You know how difficult it is just to get them certified according to ones. Why do we need to make it so complex for this core target group to be certified? I mean, I think we really need to put the smart brains in the same room and think about good solutions for handling this, so we actually are reaching those that we all think is so important to reach. So I will stop here and just say, let's do it.
Okay, I will try not to repeat the excellent point already raised, but building maybe on what Andre just said, the scalability. Once, okay, we inform, once we can operationalize, once, in a perfect world, this is now happening, how do we go to scale to the million of smallholder farmers that, if you take cocoa, coffee, how do we reach them? And how do we do all the due diligence requirements? So I think this, the future will bring us a lot of questions in terms of bringing scale to what we do. We are not even there yet, but that's where we are heading. And once we succeed for those farmer decks or those companies that luckily they're already engaging in certification and in voluntary schemes, then how do we really make sure that no one is left behind? Because that's now the bigger fear, to leave someone behind, and there is no one solution fits all.
Thank you to all of our panelists. And this panel really highlights one of the things I love the most about the ISEAL community and ISEAL events. We're not afraid to innovate, to try new things. We're also not afraid to point out where something isn't going as well as it could go. So we've really only scratched the surface on the challenges and the opportunities. And Kristen's going to tell us more opportunities to engage the topic tables and the afternoon sessions. Over to you, Kristen. Thank you again to all the panelists.